drawing directly from the content of Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. Natasha's doubts about her marital relationship with Wahid are triggered by a series of discoveries and coincidences that gradually raise her suspicions. Here's how the process unfolds. Key triggers for Natasha's doubts. 1. A conversation with her mother-in-law. Natasha's mother-in-law, Mrs. Mary Morgas, once ran an orphanage in Sudan. During a tea-time conversation, Mrs. Morgas recalls a young girl named Natasha who gave birth to an illegitimate child at the orphanage, details that eerily match Natasha's own mother's story. Mrs. Morgas describes the girl as half Russian, half Sudanese, with a Russian mother and Sudanese father, who delivered a baby boy at the orphanage and then disappeared. 2. Matching biographical details. Natasha realizes that her husband Wahid's background, being an illegitimate child, abandoned at birth, raised by the Morgas family, and never knowing his biological parents, matches the fate of her mother's first child. Both Natasha and Wahid share the same mother's name, similar ethnic backgrounds, and timelines that align. 3. Unusual coincidences. Natasha and Wahid both have mothers named Natasha, both were born in Sudan, and both were raised outside their biological families. The circumstances of Wahid's abandonment and upbringing in the orphanage, as described by Mrs. Morgas, fit perfectly with what Natasha knows about her mother's past. 4. Curiosity and research. Natasha's curiosity is piqued by these coincidences. She starts to investigate further, asking Mrs. Morgas more questions about the girl and the baby boy from the orphanage. She also searches for records and tries to piece together the timeline and details. 5. DNA testing. Troubled by the mounting evidence, Natasha secretly arranges a sibling DNA test using her and Wahid's DNA samples. The test result comes back positive, confirming with high probability that Wahid is her biological brother. Summary table. Trigger event description. Conversation with Mrs. Morgas. Mrs. Morgas describes a girl named Natasha who gave birth at the orphanage, matching Natasha's mother's story. Matching details. Wahid's background as an abandoned illegitimate child matches the fate of Natasha's mother's first child. Coincidences. Both have mothers named Natasha, similar ethnic backgrounds, and timelines. Curiosity and research. Natasha investigates further, asking questions and seeking records. DNA test confirms the biological sibling relationship. In essence, Natasha's doubts are triggered by a combination of family stories, matching details about their origins, and, ultimately, scientific confirmation. The process is gradual, beginning with a casual conversation and ending with a life-altering revelation. Here is a direct excerpt from the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed that illustrates the moment Natasha's suspicions about her blood relation with Wahid are first triggered. It was again at tea time when Natasha brought out that persistent question. She asked her mother-in-law to tell her more about that special and dear Natasha. She wanted to know her parents' name, last name, and above all what had happened to the baby she gave birth to in the orphanage, and what was its gender. "Why are you interested in knowing all those details about that girl?" asked Mrs. Mary Morgas worriedly. "Forgive my curiosity, my dear mother, but I am so interested to know everything about that girl." "But at least tell me why you want to know everything about her." "Well, I guess I can answer some of those questions myself," said Natasha while she is feeling a bit irritated by Mrs. Mary Morgas' insisting question. Before giving her answers, Natasha waited for a few seconds for Mrs. Mary Morgas' response. When her mother-in-law remained silent, Natasha continued to say, "I believe that girl gave birth to a baby boy and that baby boy is my husband. For that reason, she always remained so dear to you because she gifted you with a son. Am I right?" Mrs. Mary Morgas looked at Natasha with mistrust and said softly, "Yes, you are absolutely right, but how did you get that information?" "Only my late husband and I know about that hidden secret. I do not think even my son knows anything about his mother. He does not know what her name is. The only thing we told him about his family background is that he was born to a Muslim mother from the tribe of the Shajia. We had even guessed her tribe's name. She might even be from either the tribe Jalia or the tribe of Dangala. But we hadn't told him that his grandmother is a white woman and his father is a Sudanese man. This passage shows Natasha's growing suspicion, her careful questioning, and the moment she voices her fear that her husband might be the abandoned child of her own mother. This is the turning point where her doubts become concrete and set her on the path to seek scientific confirmation. Natasha conducts her search into her possible blood relationship with her husband Wahid secretly and carefully, without the knowledge of either Wahid or her mother-in-law, Mrs. Mary Morgas. Here's how she manages this. How Natasha carries out the secret search. 1. Internal doubt and discretion. Natasha's suspicions are deeply personal and distressing. She is tormented by the possibility that she and Wahid might be siblings, but she does not want to alarm or hurt Wahid or Mrs. Mary Morgas unless she is certain. She keeps her doubts to herself, not sharing her suspicions with anyone. 2. Gathering clues quietly. Natasha listens carefully to stories and details from Mrs. Mary Morgas about the orphanage and the mysterious girl named Natasha who gave birth there. She asks subtle questions during tea-time conversations, trying not to raise suspicion about her true motives. 3. Independent research. Natasha conducts her own research, looking for records and piecing together timelines and details that might confirm or refute her suspicions. She uses the internet to look up the meaning and origin of her name and to understand more about the circumstances of her mother's past. 4. Arranging a DNA test in secret. Natasha decides that only a DNA test can give her a definitive answer. She approaches a clinic that offers sibling DNA testing and arranges for the test without telling Wahid or Mrs. Mary Morgas. To avoid Wahid's knowledge, she secretly collects a DNA sample from him, using his toothbrush for the test, as the clinic allows this method for a discreet sample. 5. Receiving the results privately. Natasha receives the DNA test results directly from the clinic, keeping the information to herself. The result confirms with high probability that Wahid is her biological brother. 6. Protecting Wahid from the truth. Even after learning the truth, Natasha chooses not to tell Wahid or Mrs. Mary Morgas immediately. Instead, she pretends to have an affair to give Wahid a reason for their separation, sparing him the pain of knowing the real reason. Summary table. Step Natasha's action, how she keeps it secret. 1. Keeps doubts private, does not share suspicions. 2. Gathers clues, asks subtle questions, listens carefully. 3. Researches independently, uses internet, avoids involving others. 4. Arranges DNA test, uses Wahid's toothbrush, does not inform him or Mrs. Morgas. 5. Receives results, clinic contacts her directly. 6. Hides the truth, pretends to have an affair, does not reveal real reason for separation. In summary, Natasha's search is marked by secrecy, caution, and a desire to protect her loved ones from pain. She uses indirect questioning, private research, and a covert DNA test to confirm her fears, all without alerting her husband or mother-in-law. The relationship between Natasha and Wahid during her secret search is marked by growing emotional distance, confusion, and unspoken pain. Key features of their relationship during the secret search. 1. Emotional withdrawal. Natasha becomes increasingly withdrawn and distracted as her suspicions about their blood relationship grow. She is tormented by doubt and guilt, which she keeps entirely to herself. Wahid senses that something is wrong. He notices Natasha is less affectionate, avoids intimacy, and seems preoccupied, but she does not confide in him. 2. Breakdown of intimacy. Natasha's internal turmoil affects their physical relationship. She begins to avoid sexual contact, making excuses and showing discomfort when Wahid tries to be close. Wahid feels rejected and confused, interpreting her behavior as possible infidelity or loss of love, but Natasha refuses to explain. 3. Secrecy and isolation. Natasha conducts her investigation, questioning her mother-in-law, researching, and arranging a DNA test without telling Wahid or Mrs. Mary Morgas her true motives. She secretly collects Wahid's DNA, using his toothbrush, for the sibling test, further deepening the sense of secrecy. 4. Misunderstandings and pain. Wahid, unable to understand Natasha's behavior, suspects she may be having an affair or has fallen out of love with him. He confronts her, but she denies any wrongdoing and does not reveal her real fears. Natasha, after receiving the DNA results, decides to protect Wahid from the devastating truth by pretending to have an affair, leading to their separation. 5. Mutual suffering. Both suffer deeply. Natasha is racked by guilt and the burden of her secret, while Wahid is hurt by what he perceives as betrayal and abandonment. Their communication breaks down almost entirely, and both experience loneliness and emotional pain. Direct excerpt illustrating their relationship. While that restless, abominable inquiry is going on, Wahid suspected the behavior of his wife and questioned her about it. Natasha hid her insurmountable problem and denied it. She told him she is stressed out because of her studies. Wahid understood that there was something bothering his wife, but he could not figure out what it was. He noticed that his wife is not so much interested in making love with him as she used to be before. A slight doubt arose in his mind, but he dismissed it. Natasha began to show discomfort whenever he slept with her. Her responses to sex have made him feel as if he is raping her. He is worried that his wife might be in love with someone else. He shared his doubts with her, but Natasha strongly denied she is in love with any man other than him. After the sibling DNA test's result confirmed her blood relationship with her brother, Natasha stopped having sex with him. She always makes some excuses for not making love with him. Wahid decided not to bother her anymore. He shares with her the bed without any physical contact. He talks to her rarely. In summary, during Natasha's secret search, her relationship with Wahid becomes strained, distant, and filled with unspoken pain. Natasha's secrecy and emotional withdrawal, combined with Wahid's confusion and hurt, create a tragic atmosphere of misunderstanding and mutual suffering, even before the truth is revealed. Here is a direct excerpt from Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed, describing Natasha's reaction at the clinic when she hears the result of the DNA testing. Sadly, the DNA testing result revealed with high probability that her husband is her biological brother. The positive result of the DNA test has assaulted Natasha as if it is a major heart attack and made her drop lifeless inside the clinic. The clinic management dialed 911 and called the police. That day, Natasha is rushed to the hospital by an ambulance. At first, the hospital authority thought that the unconscious girl had a heart attack. But when she was revived and accurately diagnosed, the doctor understood that the patient collapsed and fainted due to the impact of great shock. Such a problem usually happened to people who heard unpleasant news such as the sudden death of a child or a dear one. Sometimes a life partner or a lover might experience a similar situation when he or she caught his spouse or lover in bed with another man or woman. When Natasha got discharged, she refused to reveal either to the hospital staff or to the police authority the reason that caused her to fall and become unconscious inside the DNA test clinic. But the clinic informed the police of the actual reason, which led to her great shock and collapse inside their clinic. Even so, the police authority didn't detain her and allowed her to return to her apartment as if there was nothing that had happened to her. Summary. Natasha is so overwhelmed by the shock of the DNA result confirming Wahid is her brother that she collapses and loses consciousness at the clinic. The staff believe she's had a heart attack, but it is actually the emotional trauma that causes her to faint. She refuses to tell anyone the real reason for her collapse, keeping the pain and secret to herself. After Natasha wakes up in the hospital following her collapse at the DNA clinic, the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed describes her as deeply traumatized and emotionally shattered. Here's what happens next, based on the text. Immediate aftermath. Natasha is revived and diagnosed by the hospital staff, who initially suspect a heart attack, but soon realize her collapse was due to emotional shock. She refuses to tell the hospital staff or police the real reason for her collapse, keeping the devastating truth to herself. Return home and emotional state. Natasha is allowed to return to her apartment. She does not share the DNA results or the reason for her distress with her husband Wahid or her mother-in-law. She is overwhelmed by guilt, shame, and confusion. The knowledge that Wahid is her biological brother is unbearable, and she feels isolated with her secret. Behavioral changes. Natasha becomes withdrawn and emotionally distant from Wahid. She avoids intimacy and begins making excuses to avoid physical contact. She suffers from insomnia, anxiety, and a sense of being trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Protecting Wahid from the truth. To spare Wahid the pain of knowing the truth, Natasha decides to pretend she is having an affair. She manufactures evidence of a fake relationship to give Wahid a reason to leave her. This leads to the breakdown of their marriage, with Wahid feeling betrayed and confused, while Natasha bears the emotional burden alone. Summary excerpt. When Natasha got discharged, she refused to reveal either to the hospital staff or to the police authority the reason that caused her to fall and become unconscious inside the DNA test clinic. But the clinic informed the police of the actual reason, which led to her great shock and collapse inside their clinic. Even so, the police authority didn't detain her and allowed her to return to her apartment as if there was nothing that had happened to her. Natasha began to leave her apartment in the morning and would not return until late evening. She spent the time roaming aimlessly in malls and public parks. Many times, she didn't go to her college and escaped her classes. She stopped having that tea time and Sudanese Alabia cookies with Mrs. Mary Morgus. She began to pretend that she was having a secret love affair with one of her classmates. She purposely left those love objects on her reading table. She waited for her brother to see them and then accused her of cheating on him. In summary, after waking up, Natasha is consumed by emotional pain and isolation. She hides the truth from everyone, withdraws from her husband, and ultimately sacrifices her own happiness to protect Wahid from the devastating reality of their blood relationship. Drawing from the content of Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed, here are the key clues that lead Natasha to suspect the truth about her blood relationship with Wahid. 1. Stories from Mrs. Mary Morgus. Natasha's mother-in-law, Mrs. Mary Morgus, shares memories of a young girl named Natasha who gave birth to an illegitimate child at her orphanage in Sudan. The details, half Russian, half Sudanese, abandoned baby boy, match Natasha's own mother's story. 2. Matching biographical details. Natasha realizes that Wahid's background as an abandoned illegitimate child, raised by the Morgus family, with no knowledge of his biological parents, aligns perfectly with what she knows about her mother's first child. Both Natasha and Wahid have mothers named Natasha, similar ethnic backgrounds, and were born in Sudan. 3. Coincidences in family history. The timeline, names, and circumstances of Wahid's abandonment and upbringing in the orphanage fit with the fate of Natasha's mother's first child. Both Natasha and Wahid are of mixed heritage, born out of wedlock, and raised outside their biological families. 4. Subtle questioning and research. Natasha asks Mrs. Mary Morgus increasingly pointed questions about the girl and the baby boy from the orphanage, trying to confirm her suspicions without revealing her true motives. She researches the meaning and origin of her name and tries to piece together the timeline and details. 5. The orphanage register. Natasha considers finding the orphanage register to confirm the names and details of the girl who gave birth to Wahid, but learns the orphanage was shut down and records may not be available. 6. DNA testing. Troubled by the mounting evidence, Natasha secretly arranges a sibling DNA test using her and Wahid's DNA samples, collected from his toothbrush, without telling Wahid or Mrs. Mary Morgus. The test result comes back positive, confirming with high probability that Wahid is her biological brother. Direct excerpt illustrating the clues. She asked her mother-in-law to tell her more about that special and dear Natasha. She wanted to know her parents' name, last name, and above all what had happened to the baby she gave birth to in the orphanage, and what was its gender. I believe that girl gave birth to a baby boy and that baby boy is my husband. For that reason, she always remained so dear to you because she gifted you with a son. Am I right? Although Natasha made that promise to her mother-in-law still, she determined in her heart to pursue her inquiry into the background of her husband. She suspected that Mrs. Mary Morgas purposely lied to discourage her from digging into the background of her son for fear of hurting him. So, she pretended to have ignored the inquiry and promised not to bring it up again. Her next step is to get hold of that orphanage register and find out who are the parents of that girl who gave birth to her husband and what their family name is. If she found that register, then her final question would be answered. In summary, Natasha's suspicions are triggered by a combination of family stories, matching details about their origins, and, ultimately, scientific confirmation through DNA testing. The process is gradual, beginning with a casual conversation and ending with a life-altering revelation. Based on the content of Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. The novel itself directly addresses the question of why no one in the media tries to find out what happened to the firstborn illegitimate child of the senior Natasha, Natasha's mother. Here's how the novel explains this. Narrative reason for media silence. The novel points out that, despite extensive media coverage of Natasha's case, her trial, her mother's execution, and the family tragedy, no journalist or investigator ever asks about the fate of the first illegitimate child. This is not an oversight, but rather a reflection of deep-rooted social and cultural taboos in the society depicted. 1. Social stigma and taboo. In the context of Sudanese and broader Muslim society, illegitimacy is considered a source of extreme shame. The fate of illegitimate children is often deliberately hidden or ignored, both by families and by the public. The media, reflecting societal attitudes, avoids probing into such matters, as doing so would be seen as reopening wounds, shaming families, or even risking backlash. 2. Focus on the scandal. The media's attention is overwhelmingly on the scandal of Natasha's pregnancies, her mother's murder, and the Sharia court's punishment. The narrative and public discourse are dominated by issues of honor, punishment, and family disgrace, rather than the welfare of the children involved. 3. Lack of legal or social interest. There is no legal mechanism or social tradition in place to track or care about the fate of illegitimate children once they are abandoned or placed in orphanages. Adoption is illegal, and orphanages are rare and stigmatized. As a result, the firstborn's fate is simply not considered newsworthy or relevant by the media or authorities. 4. Narrative device. The novel uses this silence as a narrative device to highlight the invisibility and marginalization of illegitimate children in such societies. It is only through Natasha's own investigation and personal journey that the truth about her brother, Wahid, is eventually uncovered. Direct reference from the novel. Natasha guessed that most probably in the second pregnancy someone exposed her mother and took the case to the Sharia court. Pregnancy out of marriage in a Muslim country is a serious crime punishable by the law. Natasha knew that she would not be able to find out exactly why the second pregnancy became known by the police and reached the Sharia court. After that, her mother was publicly disgraced, and she was cruelly murdered by receiving those 200 lashes on her back. Her mother's so-called illegal pregnancies eventually brought great calamity to her loving family. What the article failed to mention is what had happened to her late mother's first pregnancy. The article mentioned very clearly that her mother was impregnated twice with illegitimate babies. It explained in detail what had happened in the second pregnancy to her mother and the baby. But the article is obscure in the case of the first pregnancy and what had happened to the first baby. Natasha wondered why no one had ever asked that important question before. Although she had read that article many times before, she too failed to ask that essential question. In summary, no one in the media tries to find out what happened to the firstborn illegitimate child of the senior Natasha because of the powerful social stigma, the focus on scandal and punishment, the lack of legal/social mechanisms, and the broader cultural silence around illegitimacy. The novel uses this silence to critique the society's treatment of its most vulnerable members. 1. Sammy, the son of rape by Natasha's father. Conception. Sammy is conceived when Natasha is brutally raped by her biological father, Sheikh Yasser Saif al-Din, after she discovers her true parentage and confronts him. This act is a direct, violent, incestuous assault. Circumstances. The rape occurs after a series of traumatic revelations and is motivated by Yasser's desire to silence Natasha and erase the threat she poses to his reputation. Natasha's response. Natasha is left physically and psychologically devastated. She is hospitalized, traumatized, and later institutionalized due to the compounded trauma and disbelief from the community. Pregnancy and birth. Natasha discovers she is pregnant as a result of the rape. Despite social and ethical pressure to abort, she refuses, arguing that the child is innocent. Sammy is born prematurely and kept in a hospital incubator for months. Social stigma. The birth of Sammy is surrounded by intense moral and social debate, with many in society and even religious authorities arguing that such a child should not be born. Natasha faces isolation, suspicion, and is treated as a public risk. Identity. Sammy is both Natasha's son and her half-brother, as well as the grandson and son of Yasser. This creates a profound identity crisis and ethical dilemma for Natasha and those around her. 2. Nadia, the daughter of Natasha and Wahid, her brother. Conception. Nadia is conceived in a loving, though unwittingly incestuous, marital relationship between Natasha and Wahid. Neither is aware at the time that they are biological siblings, separated at birth due to the circumstances of their illegitimacy and social taboo. Circumstances. Their marriage is initially a source of healing and hope for both, as they are both survivors of trauma and social exclusion. The incest is only discovered later, after a series of clues and a secret DNA test. Natasha's response. Upon learning the truth, Natasha is devastated and racked with guilt. She chooses to hide the real reason for the marriage's end from Wahid, pretending to have an affair to spare him further pain. Pregnancy and birth. Nadia is born before the truth of the siblingship is discovered. She is raised in the early years in a loving, though ultimately fractured, family environment. Social stigma. The incest is not known to the public until much later, when the truth is revealed through DNA testing and legal proceedings. When it becomes public, it causes a media sensation and further trauma for both Natasha and Wahid. Identity. Nadia is both the daughter and niece of Natasha and the daughter and niece of Wahid. This creates a similarly profound identity and ethical crisis. Comparison table. Aspect. Sammy, son of rape by father. Nadia, daughter of sibling marriage. Conception. Violent rape by Natasha's father. Loving, but unwitting incest with brother. Awareness. Natasha knows the incest immediately. Natasha and Wahid are unaware at first. Natasha's response. Trauma, hospitalization, refuses abortion. Guilt, secrecy, ends marriage, emotional collapse. Social stigma. Immediate, intense, public debate. Hidden at first, then public scandal. Child's identity. Son and half-brother, grandson and son of Yasser. Daughter and niece, granddaughter and daughter of Yasser. Birth circumstances. Premature, medicalized, controversial. Born in marriage, initially celebrated. Aftermath. Ongoing trauma, legal/ethical debate. Family breakdown, media scandal. Identity crisis. Summary. Sammy's birth is the result of a violent, conscious act of incest and is surrounded by immediate trauma, public scrutiny, and ethical debate. Nadia's birth is the result of an unwitting incestuous relationship, initially loving and hopeful, but ultimately leading to devastation and scandal when the truth is revealed. Both children's births highlight the destructive consequences of secrecy, social stigma, and the failures of the systems meant to protect the vulnerable. Based on the content of Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed, Society's reaction to the birth of Nadia, the daughter of Natasha and Wahid, who are later revealed to be siblings. is complex and evolves as the truth comes to light. 1. Initial reaction: joy and normalcy. At first, Nadia's birth is celebrated within the family. Natasha and Wahid, unaware of their true blood relationship, welcome her as the fruit of their marriage. She is raised in a loving environment, and her early years are marked by hope and the promise of a new beginning for the family, especially after their traumatic pasts. 2. The revelation of incest. The situation changes dramatically when Natasha discovers, through her secret investigation and DNA testing, that she and Wahid are biological siblings. Natasha is devastated and chooses to hide the truth from Wahid, instead pretending to have an affair to protect him from the pain of knowing the real reason for their separation. 3. Social and community reaction. At first, the incestuous nature of Nadia's birth is not known to the public. The family's struggles are private, and the community is unaware of the true circumstances. When the truth is revealed through legal proceedings, DNA testing, and media coverage, the reaction is one of shock, scandal, and moral outrage. The case becomes a media sensation, with journalists, religious leaders, and the public debating the ethical, legal, and psychological implications of Nadia's birth. Nadia's identity becomes a subject of public debate. She is both daughter and niece to Natasha, and daughter and niece to Wahid, which creates confusion and stigma. 4. Stigma and isolation. Natasha and Wahid face intense social stigma and isolation. The revelation of incest leads to their separation, and both are ostracized by their religious and social communities. Nadia herself, as a child, is not directly blamed. She is innocent, but her existence becomes a symbol of the consequences of secrecy, social taboo, and the failures of the systems meant to protect vulnerable people. 5. Broader societal debate. The birth of Nadia, once the incest is revealed, sparks wider debates in society about the failures of the legal, religious, and social systems that allowed such a tragedy to occur. Women's rights activists, ethicists, and religious leaders use the case to argue for reform, compassion, and the need to address the root causes of such tragedies, such as the criminalization of illegitimacy, the lack of adoption, and the culture of secrecy and shame. Direct excerpt from the novel. Such a possibility made the moral and social questions resurrect again. If the paternity DNA test confirmed her claim, then how could such a baby girl live in society? What would be her relation to her father, mother, and baby brother? Her father would be her father and uncle, her mother would be her mother and auntie, and her brother would be her brother and cousin. During those legal processes, Natasha remained to lie lifeless as one of the vegetables in that mental hospital. The strong medications and repeated electric shocks rendered her motionless and killed most of her brain cells. The result of the paternity DNA test occupied the news for an exceedingly long time. The media people interviewed Wahid Muhammad Ahmed after he overcame that shocking news and discharged from the hospital. The media also dug deep into the life of the victim Natasha Shams al-Din. Some of them were able to go back to her past and collect all available historical data in her case. Her story is the most extraordinary, unlikely to happen again, and abusive life that ever happened in human history. It is a unique life out of a million lives. Summary table. Stage society's reaction. At birth, joy and normalcy within the family, community unaware of incest. After revelation, shock, scandal, and moral outrage, media sensation, intense stigma and isolation. Broader debate used as a case study for legal, ethical, and social reform, symbol of systemic failure. In summary, society initially reacts to Nadia's birth with normalcy, but after the incest is revealed, the reaction is one of shock, scandal, and stigma. Nadia's existence becomes a catalyst for public debate about taboo, secrecy, and the need for reform in both law and culture. After Natasha discovers through DNA testing and her own investigation that Wahid is her biological brother, she is devastated and feels compelled to end their marriage. Here's how she tries to break her marriage with Wahid. 1. Emotional withdrawal and avoidance. Natasha becomes emotionally distant and withdrawn from Wahid. She avoids intimacy and begins to make excuses to not have sexual relations, feeling deep guilt and revulsion at the thought of continuing a marital relationship with her brother. 2. Secrecy and internal struggle. She does not immediately tell Wahid the real reason for her change in behavior. Instead, she keeps the truth to herself, not wanting to inflict the pain of this knowledge on him, knowing how much he has already suffered in life. 3. Faking an affair. To create a plausible reason for ending the marriage without revealing the incest, Natasha pretends to have an affair with a classmate. She leaves fake love letters, gifts, and photos in her room, hoping Wahid will discover them and believe she is unfaithful. When confronted by Wahid and her mother-in-law, Natasha admits to the fake affair and insists she is in love with another man, even though it is not true. 4. Insisting on separation and divorce. Natasha tells Wahid that she wants to separate and later files for divorce, maintaining the story of infidelity as the reason. She refuses to discuss the real reason with Wahid, even when he pleads for an explanation and asks him to accept her decision as final and irrevocable. 5. Protecting Wahid from the truth. Natasha's actions are motivated by a desire to protect Wahid from the trauma of knowing they are siblings. She chooses to bear the blame and social stigma of being an unfaithful wife rather than reveal the incestuous truth. She also asks her mother-in-law, Mrs. Mary Morgas, not to tell Wahid the real reason, threatening to disappear with the children if the truth is revealed. Direct excerpt from the novel. Natasha decided to have a fake love affair to terminate her abominable marital relation with her brother. She wanted to break up with him without letting him know the actual reason. She was determined to be the scapegoat and take the blame alone. Natasha knew that her brother had been made to suffer a lot in his life, and she did not want him to suffer again for those stupid moral mistakes of their biological parents. She thought it was her turn to suffer for the wrong actions of her parents. She began to pretend that she was having a secret love affair with one of her classmates. She brought inside her bedroom fake love letters, gifts, and photos of one of her classmates. She took those photos with that student to make her brother suspect that she has a relationship with another man. She purposely left those love objects on her reading table. She waited for her brother to see them and then accused her of cheating on him. It did not take a long time before her brother confronted her in front of his mother and accused her of having an affair with a Muslim boy in the university. Natasha immediately admitted that she was in love with her classmate, a boy by the name of Omar Hussein. In summary, Natasha tries to break her marriage with Wahid by emotionally withdrawing, faking an affair, insisting on separation and divorce, and hiding the real reason to protect Wahid from further trauma. She chooses to bear the pain and social blame herself, rather than reveal the devastating truth of their biological relationship. Wahid's reaction to Natasha's withdrawal is a mix of confusion, pain, suspicion, and deep emotional suffering. Here's how he responds as Natasha begins to distance herself after discovering they are siblings. 1. Confusion and hurt. Wahid is deeply confused by Natasha's sudden emotional and physical withdrawal. He notices she is no longer affectionate, avoids intimacy, and seems preoccupied. He feels hurt and rejected, as their relationship had previously been loving and supportive. 2. Suspicion of infidelity. As Natasha continues to withdraw and avoid sexual contact, Wahid begins to suspect she might be having an affair or has fallen out of love with him. He confronts Natasha about her behavior, but she denies any wrongdoing and does not reveal the real reason for her withdrawal. 3. Attempts to understand. Wahid tries to communicate and understand what is wrong, but Natasha remains secretive, insisting she is just stressed or tired from her studies. He notices her discomfort during intimacy and feels as if he is raping her, which increases his anxiety and guilt. 4. Emotional distance and resignation. As Natasha continues to make excuses and eventually pretends to have an affair, Wahid becomes emotionally distant himself. He stops trying to initiate intimacy and shares the bed with her without physical contact. Their conversations become rare, and the emotional gap between them widens. 5. Painful acceptance and separation. When Natasha finally insists on separation and later files for divorce, using the fake affair as the reason, Wahid is devastated. He cannot understand why their marriage is ending and is tormented by the lack of a clear explanation. He seeks answers from Natasha's friends and his mother, but Natasha refuses to reveal the truth, asking everyone to accept her decision as final. 6. Lingering doubt and grief. Even after the separation, Wahid continues to search for the real reason behind Natasha's withdrawal and the end of their marriage. He suspects there is a deeper, hidden cause, but cannot uncover it. The emotional toll leads him to depression and, at times, suicidal thoughts. Direct excerpt from the novel. While that restless, abominable inquiry is going on, Wahid suspected the behavior of his wife and questioned her about it. Natasha hid her insurmountable problem and denied it. She told him she is stressed out because of her studies. Wahid understood that there was something bothering his wife, but he could not figure out what it was. He noticed that his wife is not so much interested in making love with him as she used to be before. A slight doubt arose in his mind, but he dismissed it. Natasha began to show discomfort whenever he slept with her. Her responses to sex have made him feel as if he is raping her. He is worried that his wife might be in love with someone else. He shared his doubts with her, but Natasha strongly denied she is in love with any man other than him. After the sibling DNA test's result confirmed her blood relationship with her brother, Natasha stopped having sex with him. She always makes some excuses for not making love with him. Wahid decided not to bother her anymore. He shares with her the bed without any physical contact. He talks to her rarely. In summary, Wahid reacts to Natasha's withdrawal with confusion, suspicion, pain, and ultimately resignation. He is deeply wounded by her distance and the breakdown of their marriage, never suspecting the true, tragic reason behind her actions until much later. Wahid's mother, Mrs. Mary Morgus, plays a significant and emotionally complex role during and after Natasha's secret search and the revelation of the siblingship. How Wahid's mother reacts. 1. Initial ignorance and support. During Natasha's secret search, Mrs. Mary Morgus is unaware of Natasha's suspicions and investigation. She continues to support Natasha as a loving mother-in-law, enjoying a close relationship with her and helping care for the children. 2. Discovery of the truth. After Natasha receives the DNA results and begins to withdraw from Wahid, Mrs. Mary Morgus notices the change in Natasha's behavior and the growing tension in the marriage. At Wahid's request, Mrs. Mary Morgus searches Natasha's room for clues about the sudden marital crisis. She finds the sibling DNA test result hidden in Natasha's belongings. 3. Shock and grief. Upon reading the DNA result, Mrs. Mary Morgus is shocked to her core. The text describes her as shaking, sweating, and collapsing to the floor from the impact of the revelation that her son and Natasha are biological siblings who have married and had children together. She is overwhelmed by the enormity of the discovery and the pain it will cause both Wahid and Natasha. 4. Dilemma and compassion. Mrs. Mary Morgus faces a moral and emotional dilemma, whether to tell Wahid the truth or protect him from further suffering. She recognizes Natasha's sacrifice in choosing to bear the blame for the marital breakdown by faking an affair rather than reveal the incestuous truth to Wahid. She considers telling Wahid the truth so that the couple could remain together as siblings for the sake of their children, but Natasha begs her not to, threatening to disappear with the children if the truth is revealed. 5. Respecting Natasha's wishes. Ultimately, Mrs. Mary Morgus respects Natasha's wishes and does not tell Wahid the real reason for the separation. She destroys the DNA test result at Natasha's request and tells Wahid that she found nothing to explain Natasha's decision, urging him to accept the separation and move on for the sake of the children. 6. Ongoing support and sorrow. Mrs. Mary Morgus continues to care for the grandchildren and tries to maintain stability in the family despite her own heartbreak. She is portrayed as a figure of deep compassion, wisdom, and self-sacrifice, carrying the burden of the secret and the pain of both her son and daughter-in-law. Direct excerpt from the novel. Mrs. Mary Morgus entered Natasha's room in her absence and painstakingly searched for her bags and other personal stuff. Sadly, the mother-in-law has found the sibling DNA test results. When she found that result and read it, every hair in her body stood up. She began to shake and sweat from head to feet. When she overcame the impact of that shock, Mrs. Mary Morgus found herself having fallen on the floor. Although the old woman has fallen on the solid floor still, she hasn't felt it. It took her a long time to come out of that incredible shocking news. After long deliberation, Mrs. Mary Morgus decided to share the truth with her son. She wants him to know why Natasha has faked that false story of being in love with a Muslim boy when she isn't. She concluded that instead of living separately and depriving their innocent two babies of the love of their parents, Natasha and Wahid could live together as sister and brother. It is neither Natasha's fault nor Wahid's mistake. It is the evil society in which they were born that should be blamed. Before revealing the truth to her son, Mrs. Mary Morgus talked to Natasha and informed her about what she found in her bag and what she wanted her and her son to do. Natasha stood firmly against the idea of informing her brother about their blood relationship. Consequently, Mrs. Mary Morgus was forced to drop the idea of disclosing the truth to her son. She understood that Natasha was serious about her threat, and therefore by informing her son she would add salt to injury. After Mrs. Morgus found the sibling DNA test result in one of her bags, Natasha destroyed that document and hence concealed the only evidence that proved her blood relationship with her brother. Mrs. Mary Morgus informed her son that she searched all Natasha's belongings and found nothing to show any justifiable reason that led her to break up with him. Then she requested him to accept Natasha's decision and keep a good relationship with her for the sake of their daughter and son. After that, she advised him to look for another good girl and marry her. Wahid is shocked when his mother advises him to look for another life partner. He couldn't believe that his kind-hearted mother would ask him to divorce his beloved wife and look for a stranger girl to marry. So, he ignored her advice and decided to figure out by himself why Natasha left him without any clear reason. In summary, Wahid's mother reacts with shock, grief, and compassion. She carries the burden of the secret, tries to protect both Wahid and Natasha, and ultimately respects Natasha's wishes, even though it causes her deep sorrow. She remains a pillar of support for the family, embodying empathy and self-sacrifice. The church plays several roles after Natasha leaves Wahid, and these roles evolve as the truth about their relationship and Natasha's trauma comes to light. 1. Initial support and attempt at reconciliation. After Natasha leaves Wahid, under the pretense of an affair, the church community initially tries to support reconciliation. The pastor of the Coptic church and his wife visit Natasha, urging her to reconsider and warning her about the consequences of leaving her husband for another man, especially a Muslim. The church leaders attempt to counsel Natasha, but she insists on her decision to separate and later file for divorce. 2. Judgment and social exclusion. When Natasha maintains the story of infidelity and separation, the church community reacts with judgment and exclusion. The Coptic Church, in particular, is described as having little tolerance for marital infidelity or for a Christian woman having a relationship with a Muslim man. Natasha is treated as an outcast, and there is a risk of excommunication. Friends from the church call Natasha to confront her about the rumors, and after the matter reaches the church, she feels she can no longer attend, knowing she will be shunned. 3. Spread of rumors and stigma. The church community becomes a source of gossip and rumor. The story of Natasha's supposed affair and conversion to Islam spreads, and the narrative grows more scandalous as it circulates. Some members claim Natasha has not only left her husband, but also her faith, further deepening her isolation. 4. Loss of spiritual home. Natasha's sense of spiritual homelessness is intensified by the church's reaction. She stops attending church, loses her faith for a time, and becomes agnostic or atheist, feeling abandoned by the very community that once supported her. 5. Later compassion and advocacy. After the truth about Natasha's trauma and the incestuous marriage is revealed through legal proceedings and media coverage, some church members and leaders show compassion and support. The church, along with friends like Alma's Abraha, helps care for Natasha's children during her institutionalization and recovery. The church also becomes a platform for advocacy, as Natasha's story is used to highlight the need for compassion, reform, and support for women facing trauma and social stigma. Direct excerpt from the novel. After the matter reached the church, Natasha knew and understood that she would not have a place in that Coptic church anymore. There is nothing more detestable that a believer could do in that Coptic Christian church than having a love affair with an unbelieving person, especially a Muslim man or a wife cheating on her husband. Since Nadia Ahmed did those two abominable and unpardonable sins, then she would be treated as a piece of garbage or an outcast, and no one would like to keep a relationship with her again. She might even be excommunicated out of the church. Even if those believers meet her somewhere in a mall or other public places, they would neither greet her nor answer her greetings. Therefore, Natasha never dared to step inside that church again. Her repulsive discovery that her own brother uncovered her nakedness, had sex with her many times, and fathered a child with her affected her Christian faith and caused serious damage to her faith in God. She became a sort of agnostic or atheist like her late grandfather, Mr. Sammy Shams al-Din, and stopped reading her Bible or going to any church. Summary table. Stage church's role/reaction. Initial separation, attempts at reconciliation, counseling, urging Natasha to return. After rumors spread, judgment, exclusion, risk of excommunication, gossip. After truth is revealed, some compassion, practical support for children, advocacy for reform. Long-term impact, Natasha loses faith, feels spiritually homeless, later finds new support in advocacy and friends. In summary, after Natasha leaves Wahid, the church initially tries to reconcile the couple but quickly shifts to judgment and exclusion when Natasha insists on separation. The church community becomes a source of stigma and gossip, leading to Natasha's spiritual isolation. Only later, after the full truth emerges, do some church members and leaders show compassion and support, helping care for her children and using her story to advocate for change. Natasha's reaction to the church's judgment after she leaves Wahid is one of deep pain, alienation, and spiritual crisis. How Natasha reacts to the church's judgment. 1. Feeling judged and ostracized. When rumors of her supposed affair and separation from Wahid reach the church, Natasha is judged harshly by the Coptic Christian community. The church treats her as an outcast, and she faces the risk of excommunication. Members avoid her, gossip about her, and refuse to greet her in public. 2. Loss of spiritual home. Natasha feels she has lost her spiritual home. The church, which once provided her with support and a sense of belonging, now becomes a source of shame and exclusion. She stops attending church altogether, knowing she will not be welcomed. 3. Crisis of faith. The judgment and exclusion from the church, combined with the trauma of her incestuous marriage and the burden of her secret, lead Natasha into a crisis of faith. She becomes agnostic or atheist for a period, feeling abandoned by both her religious community and by God. 4. Emotional and psychological impact. Natasha experiences deep loneliness, guilt, and despair. She is tormented by the loss of her marriage, her spiritual community, and her sense of self-worth. The church's lack of compassion and understanding intensifies her suffering and sense of isolation. 5. Gradual healing and transformation. Over time, and with the support of friends like Alma's Abraha and her mother-in-law, Natasha begins to heal. She eventually finds a new sense of purpose in advocacy, academic research, and helping other women who have suffered under similar systems of judgment and exclusion. Direct excerpt from the novel. After the matter reached the church, Natasha knew and understood that she would not have a place in that Coptic church anymore. There is nothing more detestable that a believer could do in that Coptic Christian church than having a love affair with an unbelieving person, especially a Muslim man or a wife cheating on her husband. Since Nadia Ahmed did those two abominable and unpardonable sins, then she would be treated as a piece of garbage or an outcast, and no one would like to keep a relationship with her again. She might even be excommunicated out of the church. Even if those believers meet her somewhere in a mall or other public places, they would neither greet her nor answer her greetings. Therefore, Natasha never dared to step inside that church again. Her repulsive discovery that her own brother uncovered her nakedness, had sex with her many times, and fathered a child with her affected her Christian faith and caused serious damage to her faith in God. She became a sort of agnostic or atheist like her late grandfather, Mr. Sammy Shams al-Din, and stopped reading her Bible or going to any church. In summary, Natasha reacts to the church's judgment with pain, withdrawal, and a crisis of faith. She feels abandoned and shamed by the very community that once embraced her, leading to a period of spiritual and emotional darkness before she gradually finds new meaning and support outside the church. Natasha finds it deeply difficult to believe that God could allow a brother to uncover the nakedness of his sister because this reality shatters her spiritual, moral, and existential foundations. Here's how the novel presents her struggle. 1. Spiritual and moral shock. Natasha is raised, even if irreligious, with the basic human conviction that incest is a profound taboo, universally condemned in both religious and secular moral codes. When she discovers, through DNA testing and her own investigation, that she is unwittingly married and had a child with her biological brother, she is overwhelmed by horror, guilt, and disbelief. 2. Crisis of faith. The revelation leads Natasha into a crisis of faith. She cannot reconcile the idea of a loving, just God with the fact that she, an innocent victim of circumstance, could be allowed to fall into such a tragic and forbidden relationship. She questions, how could God, who is supposed to be just and merciful, allow a brother and sister, separated by fate and secrecy, to meet in a foreign land, fall in love, marry, and have a child together? 3. Direct excerpt from the novel. Such an awful discovery took sleep from her eyes and turned her peaceful life into a living hell. Furthermore, her abominable discovery has damaged her Christian faith and reconverted her into an irreligious or atheist girl. She reasoned out that if there is a loving God in the sky, he would not have allowed innocent brother and sister to experience those evil consequences of sins they have no hands in them. Why he destined that she should come all the way from Addis Ababa to Calgary and her brother from Egypt to Canada, and then made them meet in the same strange land and unknowingly fell in love and finally committed the greatest abomination that humans would ever commit. 4. Theological and existential dilemma. Natasha's pain is not just personal or social, it is existential. She feels betrayed by the very order of the universe. She wonders if there is a God at all, or if everything is random and cruel. If there is a God, why would he allow such suffering and confusion for innocent people? 5. Gradual reconciliation. Over time, Natasha tries to find meaning in her suffering. She considers that perhaps her experience is meant to expose the cruelty and failures of the social and religious systems that created such secrecy and stigma. She eventually regains some faith, but her relationship with God is forever changed by the trauma and the questions that remain unanswered. In summary, Natasha finds it difficult to believe that God could allow a brother to uncover the nakedness of his sister because it violates her deepest moral and spiritual convictions. The experience plunges her into a crisis of faith, leading her to question the justice and even the existence of God, and to struggle with the meaning of her suffering in a world shaped by secrecy, stigma, and fate. Fate plays a profound and tragic role, almost as a character itself, shaping the destinies of Natasha, Wahid, and their families in ways that are both ironic and devastating. How fate operates in their story. 1. Uncontrollable circumstances. Natasha and Wahid are both born into circumstances beyond their control, illegitimacy, abandonment, and social stigma in a society that criminalizes and shames such births. Their separation at birth, due to the stigma of illegitimacy and the impossibility of adoption in their society, sets the stage for their fateful reunion. 2. Ironic reunion. Fate brings Natasha and Wahid together in a foreign land, Canada, where, unaware of their true relationship, they fall in love, marry, and have a child. The novel repeatedly highlights the improbability of their meeting. Natasha comes from Ethiopia, Wahid from Egypt, and they meet in Canada, an intersection that seems orchestrated by fate. 3. The tragedy of unwitting incest. The most devastating twist of fate is that Natasha and Wahid, separated siblings, become husband and wife and parents to a child before discovering the truth. Natasha reflects. She reasoned out that if there is a loving God in the sky, he would not have allowed innocent brother and sister to experience those evil consequences of sins they have no hands in them. Why he destined that she should come all the way from Addis Ababa to Calgary and her brother from Egypt to Canada, and then made them meet in the same strange land and unknowingly fell in love and finally committed the greatest abomination that humans would ever commit. 4. Fate as a critique of social systems. The novel uses fate to critique the social, religious, and legal systems that create the conditions for such tragedy. The criminalization of illegitimacy, the impossibility of adoption, the culture of secrecy and shame. Fate is not just random chance, but the result of systemic failures that push people into impossible situations. 5. Fate and personal agency. Despite the overwhelming force of fate, Natasha and Wahid struggle to assert agency, seeking truth, advocating for justice, and trying to protect each other from pain. Yet, fate often thwarts their efforts, leading to suffering, separation, and a lifelong quest for meaning and redemption. 6. Fate and meaning. In the aftermath, Natasha tries to find meaning in her suffering, wondering if her fate is meant to expose the cruelty of the systems that shaped her life. She ultimately channels her pain into advocacy and research, hoping to prevent others from suffering a similar fate. Summary table. Aspect of fate, how it manifests in the story. Birth circumstances, illegitimacy, abandonment, social stigma. Separation, siblings separated by social taboo and secrecy. Reunion, unwittingly meet, fall in love, marry, and have a child in Canada. Tragic irony, discover their true relationship only after marriage and childbirth. Systemic critique, fate as the product of unjust laws and cultural taboos. Search for meaning, Natasha's journey to turn fate's cruelty into advocacy and reform. In summary, fate in this novel is both a force of tragic irony and a critique of the systems that shape people's lives. It brings Natasha and Wahid together in a way that is both improbable and devastating, highlighting how secrecy, stigma, and social injustice can conspire to create suffering that feels inescapable and predestined. Both Natasha and Wahid are depicted as struggling deeply with the role of fate in their lives, especially after the devastating revelation that they are biological siblings who have unwittingly married and had a child together. Here's how they cope with fate. Natasha's coping with fate. 1. Initial shock and spiritual crisis. Natasha is overwhelmed by the cruelty and irony of fate. She cannot understand how God or the universe could allow such a tragedy to happen to innocent people. She experiences a profound crisis of faith, questioning the justice and even the existence of God. She reasoned out that if there is a loving God in the sky, he would not have allowed innocent brother and sister to experience those evil consequences of sins they have no hands in them. 2. Withdrawal and self-sacrifice. Natasha chooses to bear the pain alone, withdrawing emotionally from Wahid and faking an affair to end the marriage without revealing the truth. She sacrifices her own happiness and reputation to protect Wahid from the devastating knowledge, believing it is her fate to suffer for the mistakes and secrets of the past. 3. Search for meaning. Over time, Natasha tries to find meaning in her suffering. She wonders if her fate is meant to expose the cruelty of the systems, religious, legal, and social, that shaped her life. She channels her pain into academic research and advocacy for women's rights, hoping to prevent others from suffering a similar fate. 4. Gradual acceptance and transformation. Natasha's journey is one of gradual acceptance. She never fully makes peace with fate, but she transforms her trauma into a force for change, using her story to critique injustice and advocate for reform. Wahid's coping with fate. 1. Confusion and despair. Wahid is initially confused and devastated by Natasha's withdrawal and the end of their marriage. He cannot understand why their love story has ended so tragically. When the truth is finally revealed through DNA testing and legal proceedings, he is overwhelmed by shock and grief, even collapsing in court. 2. Search for answers. Wahid spends months searching for the real reason behind Natasha's actions, refusing to believe she simply stopped loving him or had an affair. He seeks help from friends, his mother, and even private investigation, showing his refusal to passively accept fate. 3. Emotional collapse and recovery. The revelation that Natasha is his sister nearly destroys Wahid. He experiences depression, suicidal thoughts, and a sense of being cursed by fate. With time and the support of friends like Almaz Abraha and his mother, Wahid begins to rebuild his life, eventually finding new love and purpose. 4. Turning suffering into advocacy. Like Natasha, Wahid ultimately chooses to share his story publicly, using it to expose the failures of the systems that shaped their fate and to advocate for change. Direct excerpt from the novel. She reasoned out that if there is a loving God in the sky, he would not have allowed innocent brother and sister to experience those evil consequences of sins they have no hands in them. Why he destined that she should come all the way from Addis Ababa to Calgary and her brother from Egypt to Canada, and then made them meet in the same strange land and unknowingly fell in love and finally committed the greatest abomination that humans would ever commit. But then Natasha said to herself, if there isn't God, then it would be 1 in a million possibility that a biological father and his son and daughter would come from different countries and cities, Sudan Khartoum, Egypt Cairo, and Ethiopia Addis Ababa, and they meet in a 4th country and city, Canada Calgary. Most probably, concluded Natasha, that God wanted to use such disgraceful social problem to expose the abominable evils of Islam, which forbid the noble social institution of establishing an orphanage for discarded babies, blocking the right of adoption to illegitimate children, and denying parenthood to the children who are born out of adultery. Summary table. Character coping strategies with fate. Natasha: shock, crisis of faith, self-sacrifice, search for meaning, advocacy, gradual acceptance. Wahid: confusion, search for answers, emotional collapse, recovery, advocacy, new purpose. In summary, Natasha and Wahid cope with fate through a journey of shock, suffering, and ultimately transformation. They struggle to find meaning in their pain, refuse to be passive victims, and eventually use their experiences to advocate for justice and reform, turning personal tragedy into a force for social change.